Allegheny College?
Yeah, okay.
How close are you to that?
Um,
Is that the other direction?
my sense of direction is terrible.
Because my girlfriend's from Conneaut Lake.
Okay, never heard of that.
Yeah.
But probably, I don't know, I would estimate 3 hours.
Okay.
But that's with no real general knowledge of that area.
What about Ohio?
Like 4 hours.
How do you feel about Ohio?
Down in Ohio.
Ohio.
Yeah, no.
Ohio's just like a hellscape of everything that's wrong with America, plus corn.
Yeah, I mean, it's just got like crippling economic depression, terrible drivers, and the Bigfoot apparently from those down in Ohio meme videos. That's like
Down in Ohio, swag like a...
So I'm just trying to figure out which one's worse now, Ohio or Indiana.
No, it's Ohio.
it's Ohio because Indiana's just like nothing. It's like just like pure unbroken fields of corn.
And then they have like the Indian version of Annapolis.
So they kind of know that they're nothing. They're not trying to.
Exactly.
Act
No,
well, Ohio is just
Indiana is not influencing the world whatsoever. Ohio is like actively making the world the worst place to be in.
Yeah, they have like what 29 electoral votes or something crazy like that.
Yeah, like a very like deciding amount.
Yeah. So this is welcome back to the Politics Podcast.
This is season 2, so we got to bring the A game here.
Yeah, it is season 2. Like, yeah, I like so. Yeah, you know, people are probably like wondering where we've been. I was possessed by a demon for a couple months.
I got stuck in Narnia.
Yeah. So.
Met the lion, the witch, and they gave me a terrible wardrobe. So.
Yeah, I could tell.
Did you meet Santa Claus?
No.
Isn't it weird that Santa Claus just shows up?
I met Krampus though.
Ooh, Krampus. Isn't it weird that Santa just shows up in that movie and gives like a 13-year-old child a broadsword?
I thought it was a gun.
I mean, that's true.
I don't think they're to that level.
But then
of
again,
technology
Santa
yet.
is the only man that people are willing to let come into their house and empty his sack.
Well, I mean, depends what circles you run in.
Yeah. Come on, man. Like we don't go blue. That's the lazy man's humor.
I mean, I thought his sack was red.
Look, when you come to the top of the Washington Monument here, right? This is the Eagle's Nest.
Wait, you actually made it to the top of the monument?
That's where we record, pray.
Oh, that explains the scenery.
DC right now.
Yeah, like, so everything I do, so yeah, for the listeners at home, like every time Prey and I record, I like, before we start recording, you know, because he's afraid of heights, this is the biggest reveal, I will kind of blindfold him and take him up to the top of the Washington Monument where we record.
Yeah, for all the listeners out there, he kind of just blindfolds me every single time we record. I have no idea where I'm taking to. So, yeah, every single time I'm just kind of like in like his like whole graces, and hopefully I don't get killed.
Well, yeah. So, but I'm a very gentle. I'm a very gentle and kind individual. So, of course, you know, top of the empire, or not, top of the
Washington,
the top of the Washington Monument, and we are joined today by our guest George Washington.
So I grew up on a horse farm, and by horse farm I mainly mean a farm where there were horses. It was not, our income was not solely dependent on horses. I will say that much. But I was like sitting at my desk and I was thinking, you know, like horses, types of horses. You got your Choctaw ponies. You got your Arabian horses. You got your Spanish Mustangs. And what film has all of those types of horses and the painted horse? It's Viggo Mortensen's 2004 epic, Hidalgo. So I'm going to call myself Hidalgo.
George Washington Hidalgo.
Yes, that's actually...
So...
Also, I thought you were going to go with, like, War Horse.
Or...
War Horse.
War Horse?
Where is my War Horse?
Yeah, I mean...
I have not watched the film.
No, me neither.
No, I think, like, Benedict Cumberbatch was in, like, the play version of War Horse, which is, like... It started as a play before it became a movie, which is strange because it's, like, 4 men playing the horse together. And they kind of just have a horse apparatus, and I feel like it'd be hard to be emotionally invested in just like a strange mechanical horse.
No, I thought they were going to be like dressed in the horse, like most Halloween costumes are.
Yeah, like there's a front and a back of the horse, but more it's just like they hold pieces of the horse and they kind of clickety-clack it along the stage. At least from what I've seen. And then there's a little British boy going, "Warhorse, where are you, Warhorse?" I mean, it's not called, the name of the horse is not Warhorse, but it's essentially the gist of the play.
Also, you know what they say about horses?
They don't stop.
They just keep going.
They keep going.
Horses don't stop, they keep going.
But no,
And
that
so
also
we're-
brought me back about Benedict Cumberbatch, because there's recent news about his family's atrocities in Barbados or one of the Caribbean islands. So much so that when he was going into acting, his family legit said you have to change your name.
Oh, wow.
Like you cannot go by your actual name as your stage name, because then people will find out about our past.
What was it like?
Yeah, what did he do? I've never heard of
His
that.
family basically owned slaves in either I think it was Barbados or one of the Caribbean islands. Horrid slave masters in of itself. So yeah, it's basically it came about when the official government of that again I want to say Barbados. I'm pretty sure it's Barbados. Basically, kind of came out and essentially told them that they require reparations.
He's got that Doctor Strange money.
Yeah, and much like Doctor Strange, she's spelled out there.
All right, welcome back to the Southern Fried Humanitarian Podcast, the only podcast where your two co-hosts are humanitarian workers from the South. I am Sam, and I'm joined, as always, by my faithful co-host, Prey.
What it do, people?
Hey. So, welcome to Season 2 of the show. Hey, Mr. George Washington Hidalgo, who apparently used to be a horse, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there are things about me which I feel are horse-like. But, yeah, I used to work on a horse farm, and by work on a horse farm, I mean I grew up there, so I had no choice in the matter. Mostly shoveling poop, but there were other things as well, like cleaning stalls, mostly filled with poop. So it was a very dynamic and enriching experience on the whole, I would say.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also I also spent time on a farm when I was younger, more chickens, but I do know how to shoe a horse and stuff, and yeah,
Well,
getting
Farmer Joe's out here.
yeah.
Old McDonald.
E-I-E-I-O.
Although I will say one thing that I would assume that my summers were worse than yours.
I mean, I feel like we probably share the back-breaking manual labor aspect. You probably have the leg up on me in the humidity and horrific temperatures bearing down on you aspect.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I was getting at. So yeah, but well, we're happy to have you. Really happy to have you here, George. So today, what did you want to get into today, Bray?
Honestly, I feel like since we all work in the humanitarian sector and all in relatively the same department as well, we all have experience with the employment side of resettlement agency, so we can kind of talk about, out of all of us, I'm pretty sure you've had the most experience in.
Yeah, I'm kind of an old hat. I have a senior, in my job title, which means I do the same job as everybody else, except I'm old. So.
I mean, relatively, you're not old.
No, I mean, I'm comparatively old. I'm not like the guy Indiana Jones finds at the end of The Last Crusade, but I am pretty dusty.
Oh, on a side note, that's what the S, because a lot of times I see the SES.
Oh, SES.
So I'm just always thought it was the super ES, the
No.
transformative
No,
form,
no,
the next
no.
I'm
ES.
I'm very much Clark Kent. I am not Superman.
The senior.
Just take off the glasses and just swoop your hair down.
Yeah, it was the senior. That's what I meant, not senior. Yeah.
Well, that is how I introduce myself to Spanish-speaking clients, as senior employment specialist.
Yeah.
But what's one thing that you've always thought about employment when it comes to the whole grand scheme of the resettlement process?
I feel like employment, I mean, it's obviously like vital, right? Like you need to, unfortunately in the world we live in, you need to work in order to survive.
Actually, just to live too.
Yeah, no, like things like water, food, they're not basic human rights that people throughout the world have access to, and even in America. Again, like you guys are probably left, you're pretty left leaning. Like I would say I'm pretty left leaning, and I think even extended to say like a roof over somebody's head is a basic human right that should be ensured, which is not a commonly held belief in America. And so I think it is vital. I think specifically in resettlement work, though, it falls in a weird kind of gray area in terms of like the work intensity, because it is something you need to figure out like almost immediately. But at the same time, it's not like being a caseworker or a social worker where you have to be like keyed into the case like 100% of the time, all the time, and you're resolving like medical issues and sort of things that have like a direct like I need this to like I'm going to die without this.
Yeah.
Not to be dramatic, but in some cases it can be that excessive. And so employment is kind of like in a weird gray area where it's like, yeah, you have to be keyed in and you got to be on top of things, but at the same time, there is a little leeway and latitude, and there's this give and take with the client on helping them like find the right job fit for them in the United States, which is interesting.
Yeah, and there's also kind of like you have to kind of have a callous. You have to like a callous to their situation almost, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely like a lot of. I mean everything is like a numbers game. Even like working as a citizen of the United States, it's a numbers game. It's like weighing how much your job pays you versus the expenses versus I live in this area costs this much, the jobs in this area pay this much, and these calculations. And coming to like America as like a refugee, you're not aware of like any of that context. You have some say in where you end up, but it's like people end up in these very high cost areas, and coming into the United States as like a refugee with potentially like low English proficiency, and they might not even have like a formal work background, and it's like, all right, here you are, welcome to the United States, your cash benefits barely cover anything, you need to start working immediately. Hope you enjoy working in this manual labor job that pays you barely anything. And it is like the thing, it's like we have to do that calculation like for people sometimes. It's like I want you to be happy and I want you to be comfortable, but at the same time, like at the end of the day, you need to pay your rent, and it's kind of like figuring out and striking that balance. And I think that's kind of where the counseling and the coaching aspect comes in and makes things difficult.
Yeah. I think my thing is also like the time crunch, depending on the case as well. Because again, there's only a certain allotment of time before like their rent is wholly on them now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of like the main motivational drive on getting them employed. It's because we don't want them to be homeless. Because that's very easy to do in the U.S.
Yeah, and I mean it's just like I wish there was like a kinder word for it, but it's just like the predatory nature of capitalism, and it just it breaks my heart to think that there are these people coming over, escaping these difficult situations where they were fighting for their life and their survival in one way, and then they get over here and they're fighting for their life and their survival in a different way. It's just sort of you go from situations where there may be war or conflict to this thing where the economic realities that you have to face make life as difficult, just in a different way.
Yeah, so in a sense they basically don't really have a time to breathe from going from one tragedy and traumatic experience to a whole new tragedy and traumatic experience. Because again, that's the scary thing, and this was something I always like keep in mind when I was like working with these clients, was just that they may have a lot of reservations about starting work because again, this is gonna be a whole different culture. If they are not familiar with the language, they also have that sense of fear of like, how is this gonna work out? How am I actually supposed to communicate with these people if we don't speak the same language? This is like, so many questions about like the logistics of it all, because again, they come from a place where a lot of work is kind of consolidated in like big denser areas rather than the U.S. where for us it's kind of car centric.
Or just even like I was thinking a lot about, we have clients that are from like Afghanistan who have who tend to have typically very large families, and that makes sense if the primary source of work in your area is agriculture, because more kids, more hands to work the agriculture, get it up.
Y'all two farmers would probably know more about that.
And then exactly
Well, I grew up with sisters and they never had to do so.
But you know what I mean. Like that's so when you come, so all of a sudden, hey, we've destabilized your entire country and culture and way of life, and now you have to and now you're coming to the United States and you're living in a 2-bedroom house and there are 8 of you.
Yeah, and I think it's just like, one other thing I'd probably like to talk about with you guys, if you haven't already covered it, is self-care within the humanitarian context. And it's just, I think about that so often, just the idea of coming from this place of, male privilege, white privilege, privilege in terms of like the place on earth where I was born. And I go home at night and I think about how I'm going to make ends meet and how I'm going to juggle like the various responsibilities of my life in terms of my family and romantic relationships, and then you start thinking about the things refugees are going through, sitting at home, not working, with your 8 kids that you have to provide for, your spouse that you kind of have to help acclimate to this new environment, and maybe struggling in their own way. And it's like, it doesn't invalidate the experiences that I have, but at the same time it's like it's so difficult to imagine just the struggle of that situation.
Yeah, just comparatively, it's like it's not quite the same. There's a whole different there's different things for different people relating that. Another thing that I also kind of think is like the culture shock of of working in the States, because one of the big things that we're also told to counsel on clients is just advocating for a 2-income household, because a lot of times clients are very much hesitant towards having their wives work, that patriarchal mumbo jumbo, and so they will be adamant of their wife will not be working, and it's also maybe out of bare necessity too, because they have small children. Getting childcare in and of itself is difficult, even if you're getting help through the government. If both parents are trying to work, they will still tell you no, and so the whole prospect of getting childcare or daycare, it's gonna be rather expensive, and so some of that patriarchal moment will still have to play in effect, and then that also just hinders I feel the women in the refugee community, because they're not given the same amount of exposure or ability to gain experience as a male counterparts, and they both really need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that, the worst part about it is the stories we hear about refugee women or humanitarian immigrant women are the ones of the single mothers who have to do all this, another organization reached out to us and asked for a story about a specific refugee female case that we had, and if we could kind of provide them with a little bit of details, right?
Yeah, so essentially, for a lot of you listeners that don't really know about either the humanitarian sector or nonprofit sectors, a lot of times when you're discussing with your donors or grantees about your work, they typically they will love the numbers, but what really gets you'll be able to pull on those heartstrings are the stories. So,
but that's just how but that is just kind of how people communicate and relate to things.
Yeah, and it's also just the best way, because if you can say we did X amount this year, that's fantastic. But if you get a story of why this is important, and just kind of wrapped in a sense that it's like a Harry Potter novel,
Mm-hmm.
then of course they're gonna be like, oh man, this is such great work. We're gonna give you more money. So, but again, it's also kind of highlighting on the facts of like success for refugee women are typically overlooked by successes overall because they're always dominated by men, and usually it's always coming from a place of like necessity in my experience with the women, because it's not like them being a power two parent household. Typically, it's not always the case, but like typically it's like if it's a two-parent household, the wife typically would not want to work, but for a lot of single mothers, they need to work. There's no like, oh, I want to be a part of, the society. I want to be a part of helping my husband with the household expenses. No, it's like, if I don't do this, me and my kids are out in the streets.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So yeah, I appreciate the conversation we're having, and I feel like it's a conversation that needs to be had, but
I don't think it's a conversation for three males to basically just.
yeah. So I kind of want to veer more towards like kind of get us back on track to like the self-care aspect of all this. I appreciate when you go off on this, but we gotta but I feel like my role here is sort of to rein this in. Yeah. So.
Right. So let's go back to the self-care.
Yeah. So George, what do you do to how do you? Okay, let's say we have
What are your recommendations for good self-care?
Or let's say this: here's a scenario, because stories, right? That's how we relate, and that's how we can tug at the heartstrings. Let's tug at George's heartstrings.
Okay, I'm ready to be tugged.
Okay, so it is you have an intern who's been assigned under you. This intern just finished their undergrad and is starting to work in the humanitarian sector, and just got off of work, or just got off of a call after a very long day with someone who was very angry about their SNAP benefits lapsing through no fault of their own, through a clerical error in the government. This person's like, "Hey, George, look, I'm really stressed out, even though I still live with my parents, but what would you recommend me do to take care of myself on this?"
So I think the idea of the intern specifically is interesting, because obviously as employees with interns, we kind of have a responsibility to them to ensure that they have this enriching and engaging experience. So I'll start with that aspect, and then I'll get more into the self-care aspect. I think it's very important for humanitarian workers who rely on volunteer work or intern work, and unfortunately the reality of just funding means a lot of our intern work is unpaid, which I'm not a fan of. I'll state that clearly now. I think that we as the employees, we're getting paid to do this. We have the experience, the professional development. We should be acting as insulators to them, and we want to, these are adults, coming out of college, like you said, a lot of the time, and we want to, help them understand the realities of this work. So I think it is important that, on occasion they maybe be exposed to more intense emotionally charged things like you're saying, but at the same time it's important, it's contingent upon us as, their employer to talk to them and say how are you doing after that, it sounds like a difficult situation, talk with me about how their call went, and if they feel like they need the latitude to step back from that, give them the latitude to step back from that.
I feel that's always a big discussion I always do with interns, especially during an interview of what are their self-care techniques, because even if they're not going into the humanitarian field itself, self-care is actually really important in every job or field that you ever get into, because again, you're gonna be burnt out through whatever work you're gonna be doing, whether it be humanitarian or just straight up office administrative work. There's only a certain amount of hours you can put in before your brain just stops. So I think having good self-care routine is actually important, because the ability to disconnect from the work and not, because again, I've always tried to work on my self-care, because again, there are moments where I wake up in the middle of the night with a panic attack about not doing something for a client, and I'm just that's on my mind until like I can get back into the office and try to get that thing done. So.
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on like a very important thing there, like an aspect of self-care in the humanitarian sector and refugee resettlement work, you know, as part of that larger sector, is we feel like this sense of responsibility for our clients, and you're like keyed in constantly. You know, I always tell the story about I got a phone call from a client at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning asking me for the number of a different employee who works at our office. And, you know, that's the thing is like I could have just ignored that phone call, but at the same time, you know, what if he was, you know, bleeding out on a sidewalk somewhere and he was the only person, he could think, I was the only person you could think to call. And it's, you run those scenarios over and over in your mind, like, am I truly going to be able to distance myself from this, you know, in the way I need to recover? And that's kind of a difficult thing to do. And I think, you know, really the thing that I think is most helpful for me is when you work with these clients, you kind of, you know, you think of it as being in like a framework. It's like, here's the things that are my responsibilities to help you. Here's how I'm going to try and go above and beyond to help you. And then, you know, beyond that, when you get to like the really difficult situations, like, you know, like evictions, like rental support stuff, it's the one that I've faced the most. And it's, you identify, you know, resources and opportunities for them to get that rental support. You try and help them find work or get more hours if, you know, they aren't working already. And you kind of just help them along, you know, this kind of spine of things that you can do. But once you reach the end of that spine, the thing that is hard for people to learn, and I think that they need to learn, is going, I've done everything I can. I fulfilled my obligation. It's out of my hands now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really hard to do that in the resettlement space, but you have to do that or you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's like I've heard it described as like compassion overload. You know, like you only have this like, or like think of it like a bank account. Like you have a certain amount of like compassion that you can draw on, and you know, compassion is shown to you, or you show it to yourself, and that, you know, puts more in your compassion bank account. But then, you know, we have to like kind of draw on that a lot. So we have to really focus on recovery. So I've heard it described as like kind of how like people who play like football, for example, have to like spend a lot of time like on their bodily recovery because it's very rough on your body. For us, I feel like it's kind of like that, but like just emotionally, you know?
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I think it's also because like we also have like we work with these clients more often than not, and so we actually have like faces to the names rather than just like a regular. Because like if it was just like a regular schmegler, like, you know, government job, we would just see names and not really think too much. We like, you know, seen their faces, we've heard them speak, we've basically heard their life story at that point. And so there's like a level of like, you know, we feel some type of way about them. We care about their like well-being. But at the end of the day, like we're always kind of like, I've seen a lot of people put themselves like back and just trying to keep like all their clients happy and supported, and that's always terrible because like it's a detriment to yourself, and that can be a detriment to the clients later on because you're not going to be fully effective working with other clients.
Yeah, you're no good to anyone if you're not, you know, if you're not present.
Well, that's
you're not you when you're hungry.
Okay, yeah, that's good. No, I mean, that's the thing I always say to, you know, myself and to other people who work in this space or who work in general. It's there's always going to be more work. There's only one you.
Mm-hmm.
So you sacrificing yourself on the altar of work, you know, you're in the humanitarian space, you're doing good work, you're helping people, but there's always going to be more people to help. And it is kind of, you know, it is kind of like an existential kind of thing to think about, but and I'm curious to hear you guys talk about this as well. So it's, you bring in those self-care aspects to kind of manage that. Like I go to the gym, I listen to music, I, go out drinking with friends. Those are my typical kind of decompression activities. But I'm curious from you, Prey, especially because you're single like me, to hear when you do this work. Things also like bleed over into your personal life as well in ways that you don't expect. And so for me, I was like struck by it recently. I use like dating apps primarily to, be involved with people. And I was, like I matched with this girl that I was excited about matching with, and I was talking with her and messaging with her. And then like it occurred to me, like even though I was interested in her, like when I would get home at the end of the day, and we're talking like 7:30, I'm making dinner and she messages me, even though I'm excited about this person, I'm so exhausted from the work, like the emotional burden and the physical burden, the commute, all that I'm like, oh my God, instead of being excited to talk to this person, I'm like, oh my God, this is like another thing that like I have to do now. Like I have to deal with this now, and like this job makes everything feel like a job.
Yeah, honestly, my simple answer to all that is basically just
Oh,
just
okay.
like copious amounts of. So, but I do get what you mean, and that was kind of like a problem I had when I first when I was dating my girl, like when I first got into a resettlement agency. Was just that, like, again, you just feel so emotionally drained by the end of the day. You barely could communicate with that person, and like, she wasn't having it either way, because like, when you stop that level of communication, she's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Are you cheating on me or something? Like, no, I'm just tired. And then my previous job before this, when I was like basically helping low-income kids in DC, that was even more emotionally draining and also physically draining, because those kids just run around and you're just trying to hoard them all together, and you're just like, I don't understand how parents are able to do this. I don't even understand how teachers are able to do this. They definitely need to be paid more. Government, do your job. Pay them teachers.
You put the government on blast?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, Brandon. You got this.
Yeah, I don't know. It's something I'm still learning how to manage, I think.
I think it's just like that level of decompression is needed. Like, I'm a firm believer, like every single time I leave work, I always try to have like a moment of like decompression. Just taking like just radio silence for everybody, and everyone knows that like I have radio silence from that time, just so I can just process everything that happened today and just kind of like find a way to relax. Because after that, like after you kind of decompress and get into that relaxing segment, your mind is more free to actually just start doing other things. That's what I also try to do, because like, again, if you also have like other things like hobbies or activities, then that always helps out in detaching yourself from what's going on, and detaching yourself from that mental exhaustion, because you're just mentally exhausted because you've been doing one thing the whole entire day. And just switching it up to something completely different actually brings a new life to you.
So my experience with this.
All right, share your experience.
So for me, I try to keep gratitude in front of me before anything. Like I keep things like that. To me, really helps keep things in perspective. Because like not to get too deep, but I've always kind of like I consider myself very lucky to be alive, and keeping gratitude for that really helps me like kind of center myself. I also it's also important to ask yourself why you got into this field. And I answer that question with like, I feel honestly like it's a vocation. For me, this is how I feel. I feel sort of called to this work right now. by a power greater than myself. I can't tell you what that is. I couldn't say exactly what that is, but that's what's true for me, and that's exactly how I feel. So I feel like I kind of have this sort of. I feel like if I can mention something, then it can be managed.
That's a Fred Rogers quote.
Is it?
Yeah, no, Mr. Rogers said, when something is mentionable, it becomes manageable.
I've heard that before. I didn't know it was from Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I like to.
This is the same. Will he be my neighbor, Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Yeah. King
okay.
Friday, yeah.
Oh, okay.
What do you do with the man that you feed? Do you pound some clay or some dough?
Yeah.
I'm not going to sing the whole song. But
Thank you,
that guy,
George.
yeah.
But yeah, so I keep so first things first, I keep gratitude in front of me.
Gratitude is the attitude.
That is an attitude of gratitude. It's not just a beatitude. But yeah, so that's where I start. I also kind of, you'll see me doing this if you ever see me in the office. I do about a 10-minute meditation every morning before I do any work. Because that's me tapping into and sort of getting in tune with it. I follow a spiritual tradition started by the Jesuits called the Daily Examine, where you kind of examine your thoughts, give thanks, and sort of look forward to the day, basically. Happy to talk about that more, but I don't want to come off as trying to impose my religion on anyone.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't feel like that's, I'm not a listener, but I don't feel like that's how you're coming across.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not something you want to say as a guest on the podcast that other people are listening to.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? So, I kind of go back to...
No, I meant I'm not a listener as in I'm not actively listening right now.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Like the people listening to this podcast.
The folks at home, yes.
Yeah, I am an avid listener.
Mm-hmm.
You heard that, folks? Avid listener.
Avid listener. I'm not trying to push my religion on anyone. Anyway, but yeah, no. So I think prioritizing what is and isn't something you need to do in your life. Work does not come first for me. It just can't. So my own health comes first, because whatever. And I was told, and I tell this to my sisters, I tell this to anyone who will listen. Everything you put above your own health, you will lose. So, if you can't, you gotta prioritize that. So, I guess it's just it's a mentality. It's sort of a mindset for me. And also being able to disconnect and decompress and properly heal. So, some techniques I have for that is just kind of, I practice the Serenity Prayer. I probably say it about 20 times a day, and just that, real serenity and, trying to accept things as they are.
Yeah. And I think also the attitude is a key part of it, and perspective and understanding your blessings, but at the same time, I will just give the disclaimer. I think it's also, it's important, and I've said things of similar ilk earlier, but it's important in the humanitarian field to recognize, no matter what, your client's suffering does not make your own suffering any less valid.
Not at all.
They've been in horrible situations you'll never experience, but a lot of times you'll be in situations that they'll never experience. Yeah. And, different people are different people.
Mm-hmm. And also...
And that's the beauty of empathy.
Yeah.
You don't have to actually experience it to actually feel for somebody.
And also another fun thing that helps me out, Rule 62.
You're going to tell us what Rule 62 is?
Have you never heard of this? Don't take yourself too seriously. So... just have a little bit of levity in your work. Start a podcast with your work best friend.
Honestly, I never take myself seriously.
I know. Just and just have just joke, tell jokes that relieves stress. Laugh. enjoy things.
Like pet your cat, dog, lizard,
Yeah,
reptile,
yeah. Install it.
arachnid.
Yeah, just talk about horses not being able to stop.
Go and get that forklift certification.
Get your OSHA forklift certification. Wear your PPE.
Like, that will give you a smile every single day, knowing that you are OSHA certified.
Yeah.
As a forklift driver.
Yeah, we have our
And the
OSHA.
bragging rights that come with it too.
We have our.
And all the women that will jump on you because of that OSHA forklift certification. And if you don't swing that way, all the men will also jump on you too.
Or the non-binary individuals will also do that.
We always kind of like talk to our guests about like their upbringing in upstate because again, we're the Southern Fried Humanitarians. We do like to talk about the South a lot.
Yes.
So yeah, not in the South shall rise again statement. More so like the South does have its problems. It still has its problems. It still kind of suck, but it's our home, and no matter what, we always like to see it be better.
Yeah, but at the same time, we're also proud of the fact that we grew up where we grew up because it gave us our own like sort of unique cultural identity.
Perspective and stuff like.
Yes, that too.
It made us to who we are today, got us to this point. So we're appreciative that that's being our home.
Might even say we have an attitude of gratitude about our
One might say
longitude
that.
and latitude.
Yeah, I think you should get that on a T-shirt.
Actually, yeah, that's our
Friday Man
first
merch.
like piece of merch. Attitude of gratitude about our longitude and latitude.
There you go.
Hey,
I love it.
Don't forget to buy Southern Fried Humanitarian merch on our Patreon site.
We have a Patreon site?
We're going to.
Oh, yes, we
Oh,
are.
there you go. I like it.
Premium members also get added content and bonus jokes that we had to edit out.
Yes.
Okay.
Like,
So,
yeah, like having and don't forget a big ol'.
spicy.
I know.
So I don't know. What would you want to know about my upbringing?
So-
what would you want to know about the mystery that is me?
Well, George,
Let's start off the state.
so yeah, the state of Pennsylvania, the woods for William Penn.
Yes.
How does it feel to be from like one of the most mid states in the country?
It's a fair question. Fair question there, Sam. I would say it feels pretty mid. I specifically grew up in Western PA, which has often been called the South of the North.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, yeah. Its number
That's
one.
such an oxymoron.
Well, I mean, its number one exports are tractors and casual racism.
No, when I drove through Butler County. I don't know if you know where that is.
Yeah, I know Butler County.
Yeah, I drove through there, and I saw a Nazi flag on a billboard.
Wow. There you go.
Yeah, that was
I think I'm not sure. It used to be that Western Pennsylvania in the modern era had the highest concentration of active KKK chapters. I'm not sure if that's still the case.
And
They
the-
could-
no, that's in northeast Arkansas.
The
Okay.
irony of that too, like Pennsylvania was literally part of the Union. They were fighting the Confederacy.
No, it's difficult to wrap your head around.
Yeah, that's.
And no, so I mean, I feel like I've gotten a little bit of a southern exposure, a little bit of southern comfort.
I mean, you do have the tractor exports. What
I
kind of
mean,
tractors though?
I mean, you
If
typically.
it's not John Deere, it's not.
Well, you got your John Deere, you got your Husqvarna. You'll occasionally see a Ferrari tractor if somebody's really
Hey.
busting out the dough.
I'm guessing she really thinks your tractor's sexy.
She does think my tractor's sexy. It does really turn her on. She's always staring at me as I'm chugging along. No, I will say, there's that, and then it doesn't exactly make me a southern boy, but it did give me a little bit more southern exposure. I'm just
Little
remembering
Southern flair.
Southern flair. I'm just remembering Southern Exposure is the name of a strip club near where I was living in the South.
That's hilarious.
But no, during the pandemic, I actually went and I lived in Hiawassee, Georgia, in Towns County for about a year.
Why?
Well, my parents have So there's a lake in Georgia. It's called Lake Chattooge. When I first read it, I thought it was Lake Chattoogie, because that sounds a little more southern, but no, not the case. So my parents actually, they haven't retired yet, but they're looking to retire, and they bought a lake house on Lake Chattooge, which was sitting empty. So in May of 2020, I was like, well, I could just sit in a room staring at the white walls of my apartment, or I could go stare at a lake. And so I went and I stared at a lake.
You chose right.
Yeah.
A very Henry David Thoreauian.
Yeah, no, I watched battles between ants and wrote down poems about the cruelty of ant war. That was Thoreau, right?
That sounds like Thoreau.
Okay.
Or it was Walden too.
I don't know. Somebody wrote poems about ant war, thrilling as that may sound.
It does sound thrilling. I have a couple of ants and they're
Honestly,
perpetually.
every single time I think of like insects and an author, I'm always thinking of Kafka.
Oh, Metamorphosis.
Yeah. Or Ovid.
Oh, yeah.
From being from Pennsylvania and living in Georgia for a year, how would you say that the sort of, I guess, cultural differences informed your attitude towards humanitarian work? Or no, not your attitude towards humanitarian work, but like sort of your perspective on humanitarian work.
I guess there wasn't really like coming from Western Pennsylvania to Georgia. There's not really that many differences.
Mm-hmm.
There's like more churches per square mile than maybe I was accustomed to. One thing I found was strange was like, I was like, oh, like Southern people, like Southern hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I did experience a lot of that from like old ladies, including like some old ladies who catcalled me one time.
That's fun.
But
they always give this best like pecan pies though.
no, I was like taken like very good care of by like random old women I met who would bring me like dinner. But like out and about, I was surprised. Like I'd walk past people and be like, oh hey there, how's it going? Nothing. Where's that Southern? Maybe they're just poor representatives of the South.
Well, it really depends on like which part you go to.
Also, no one in Towns County is like from the South.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Northern Georgia doesn't count as Georgia.
No, it does. But like Towns County is kind of like where it's kind of like how like people like move to Florida. Yeah.
Okay, that's a fair assessment.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I guess the difference in resettlement work, there wasn't really any that like I particularly noticed. I think really in Western Pennsylvania, like I'd tell people like what I would do, and there wouldn't be, even though that's very like red, like right leaning, there
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be really any associated like follow-up comments.
Also, like, here's something I've noticed about when I like talk about my job to people like in the South, like in my family or just like people I went to school with. It's always like employment kind of seems to be like the most like I guess palatable part of humanitarian work to like right wingers.
Well, yeah, because it's like
It feeds
like
on
they-
like the capitalism that they like.
well,
they
because it's
love.
like, oh, they're coming over here to work. That's good. People should work. I work 40 hours a day or 40 hours.
Yeah,
a day.
40 hours a day.
If I work 40 hours a day in the steel mill,
Yeah.
and everybody else should do the same thing. Anybody who comes over here should do the same thing.
So as long as they don't take my job.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
the work ethic idea, I think you're right, is more palatable as opposed to like if you were to talk about things you do as a caseworker, like, oh, they receive government cash benefits, like they receive free money from big government.
Yeah, like I've like talked about like the work that like some of my clients do to like members of my family, and I've just actively seen them become less racist towards that particular group. It's just like
No, so I think it's like, so like I was saying, in Western PA you don't really get follow-up comments. You'd kind of be like, oh, this is what I do, and they'd be like, oh, okay. In the South, they'll ask you questions like, oh, like these people are being vetted, right? Or like these people, when you bring them over, like you're doing this, and this, right? Like they weren't like angry about it, but they were more concerned about it.
yeah, and I've had that conversation too. It's like with like the Fox News people, because like again, like it's kind of like you're kind of victimized of like fear mongering in that respect, and so it's kind of like you have to kind of assuage that. and then, as we've talked about before, kind of tell a story that kind of tugs at the heartstrings, humanizes your clients, and sort of breaks that like mythos that a person may have with respect to a humanitarian immigrant. Because like, and you've described it perfectly to me before, and I've like used this in like interviews. I've done like when people ask me why I work here, because like employment, you're giving people back their humanity.
Yeah, I think it's just more of like, granted, like where I was at in the South is very much a kind of a nice little liberal bubble. So like, all those follow-up questions will be like, oh my God, that's fantastic. So do you do this with clients? Oh, you should come to my church. They actually do something similar to what you guys are doing. I think you'd be a great option. So they kind of like are more involved in the mission because again, I always frame it as like, I'm helping these people out who had no other choice but to flee their country and search for a new one.
And also, like, what I like to do, if you really wanted to, if we were doing ad copy right now, or like if we wanted to like write ad copy for employment as a like sector of humanitarian work, what I would do is I would say employment, putting the human in humanitarian.
Oh, there
I was
you
going to
go.
do more like employment, putting the capitalism in humanitarian work.
Employment, get that bread, son.
Yeah, I like mine's
I
better.
think yours is probably better, but
Yeah, get to.
it's the same sentiment.
I'm gonna get you bread like a duck, boy.
So no, really I guess the only other like notable thing I guess or difference like in the South is like when you meet people and like you associate with them in general, but also in the South, you can kind of understand like based on their reactions to certain things, how they'll react to other things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did a mail-in ballot when I was living in Georgia, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and I talked to one of my neighbors at the time about the mail-in ballot and went on this whole big extended thing. And I was like, okay, maybe the way in which I describe my work to him or people I've talked to who are similar to him should take on like a different form. So it's like I did what I would like to call a selective description of my job, which is instead of saying when refugees come over to the United States, I help them find work, I said that I work with interpreters who supported the United States Army who are now coming over and resettling in the United States. And it's like, that is not true, that is true, but it's a small selection of the people that I work with.
Yeah, and do you think that do you think like we as like humanitarian workers, do we have like a responsibility to kind of tell a story to people outside of us in such a way that like kind of humanizes our clients instead of like selectively like kind of describing it? Or do you think that like selectively describing it can kind of protect you in a certain way?
I mean, I think it is. I think an aspect of it is protection and it's like, I think it's fine if you work in the humanitarian sphere to do that because obviously like no one should feel obligated to be like harassed or belittled like based upon what they do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I think describing it in certain ways makes people more amenable to the idea of it, and that gives you an opening to convince them that it may be more of a nuanced issue than they originally thought. So it's like, you think about, you're like like an old Southern guy, like the guy I talked to, and it's like, oh, like people coming over, from all these countries and, taking our jobs, and I don't support that at all. But then it's like, okay, you give them the nuance, you give, oh, these are actually people who had to leave their home because they supported the U.S. Army.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, then it becomes like tied to patriotism, then it becomes tied to this institution that they revere. And then when you kind of have like that access point, you can also sort of, because people are tribal, right? People other. But then when you talk about, particular groups of refugees, you talk about like, we're bringing over, supporters of, the United States government in Afghanistan, or we're bringing over Christians from Ethiopia, and then you have these things, and they're like, oh, there's Christians in Ethiopia? I didn't know the people that were coming over were Christian. And then you kind of like find these like connectors, and it's like, would it be the ideal situation for them to be wholly supportive of this kind of thing? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But when you connect it to things that they value, then they'll value the thing that you're trying to kind of sell them on or express to them as being valuable or important.
Well, also, to sort of go against that not in a weird way. I completely agree with you, but also like we have stressful jobs.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can like. There's only so many conversations you can have with like older folks or people from the older generation, and at a certain point, like why do I have to fight this like? Why do I have to go against this sort of like? Why is it my responsibility as a worker to also like shatter this like weird Fox Newsian like aura around my work?
Yeah, that's how I view it too. Is like, it is not my responsibility to basically teach you on why your viewpoints or racism is basically immoral and wrong. I don't care if you say that's your opinion. Like, no, it's not. You're legit wrong. You should not be for any sort of racism or like any sort of discrimination based on any factor. But yeah, I think on that point, it's like if someone is wanting to learn more or actually have follow-ups, then yes, I will be more than happy to actually like provide information. But if you're just trying to be a about it, then no, I'm not gonna like give you any amount of my time, because at that point it can go on deaf ears. They don't really care. They're just going to want to find something that they can just hang on, and so they can keep on like their whole viewpoint intact.
Yeah, and I think, that's fair. It's not anybody's responsibility to feel compelled to battle to change people's opinions, like people's like entrenched opinions. I think
That is a very uphill battle.
Yeah, advocate as much as you're willing to advocate, with the understanding that some of your work may be in vain. And I feel like, it's like the idea of, so just to give you like, everything is an uphill battle. Life is an uphill battle. Your settlement work is an uphill battle. Just to give you like the sense of the way I describe, kind of continuing to fight that fight even though it may seem hopeless, is I have described resettlement work uncharitably as bashing your head against a wall. And you can do...
Fair assessment.
So you can do that. So let's say, you're bashing your head against the wall. Your goal is to knock the wall down.
Yeah, I thought the goal was to knock yourself unconscious.
Well, you'll accomplish both. You are just slamming your head into this wall again and again and again. And it has very little give. You're making no progress, or it seems that way at first, but you continue. Small cracks start to form. Pieces chip off the wall. Over time, you will probably have damaged yourself so much over the course of hitting that wall that you'll need to stop, and you'll need to either take a step back and start again, or you'll need to stop entirely. Both are fair to do. But at the end of the day, when you step back from that wall entirely, you look and you see, hey, maybe I didn't knock down the wall, but there's pieces of it missing now.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next guy comes along who's willing to start where you stopped, and he chips a little more of the wall away.
Yeah, exactly. And also, what's really important for you if you're bashing your head against a wall is as at the end of the day, you need to put bandages on it.
Oh,
you need to take care of yourself.
Let's go back to self-care.
Exactly. Yeah. So you need to, ice that head, ice that skull.
Not that type of ice, though.
So
the good ice, the one that comes out of the fridge, not the one that comes out the border.
Oh, I thought you were talking about this kind of ice, pointing to my wrist.
What about a delicious ice cold natural ice?
Ah.
That just sounds disgusting.
Yeah, no, gentlemen, it's been good having this discussion with you. I'm happy to talk whenever. It's been an honor. I would, because we're wrapping it up, I will give you and we were kind of going into my background. This is your final opportunity, open book, to ask anything about me that you want to know. And I'll communicate it to you and to the listeners.
Well, George, the thing I really want to know is, and also, and of course, I want to know how big is your.
Well, and I'd say about 3 times a day.
Wow. Well, thank you. That was our interview with George Washington Hidalgo. And now I think
Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, George.
Yeah, of course,
And now it's time for burn-ins.
What are you gonna do for burn-ins?
I don't know, we'll just talk about anything. Let me just think of let me just look at stuff.
Oh, we can probably y'all hear about Brazil's January 6th that happened on January 8th.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's one of my favorite dumb president jokes. So it's like so someone goes to Joe Biden and it's like, okay, so Joe Biden meets with Brazilian diplomats, a couple of Brazilian diplomats, and they fly back to Brazil, right? And they're due to some engine failure, their plane crashes in the ocean and they die. So someone goes, President Biden, I have some bad news. 2 Brazilian people have died in a plane crash in the ocean. And Biden just kind of sits down, puts his hand on his head, and goes, "My God, how many's a Brazilian?"
That's good. I like that.
It worked for Trump, and it worked for Bush. It didn't really work for Obama.
You're gonna have to hope there's not a with it president if you want to keep using that joke. But I think you're probably safe for the time being.
Yeah, absolutely.
Until Pete Buttigieg in 2024.
Yeah. How many's a Brazilian? My God, how many's a Brazilian?
I was at the G.W. Bush.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
George Washington Bush. Who speaks Spanish.
So back to January 6th to Electric Braziligaloo.
Braziligaloo.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know. That's the thing is that's the difference between here and Brazil is that it happened here. They're still having the trials to prosecute people, and people are still being tracked down and arrested.
We're still having those committee meetings.
Yeah, and in Brazil there were busloads of people who were arrested almost immediately.
So that's the difference between a left-wing government and just moderate government. Moderate government's trying to appease everybody. Left-wing is just y'all basically just shot yourself in your own foot.
Is Lula even left-wing though?
Yeah, Lula's pretty left-wing. I mean, there's a difference between South American left-wing and left-wing, but I'd say Lula's pretty left-wing.
Yeah.
I mean,
people.
Pray you lean left of Leon Trotsky, so I'm not really tired. So, if you say he's left-leaning, I'll take your word for it.
If you were ever assassinated with an ice axe in Mexico.
What kind of ice?
We
talking out of the freezer, ice on the wrist, natty ice?
I don't know, an ice strong enough that they needed an axe to break it up, apparently.
Yeah, honestly, I'm so left, I go in circles.
Oh, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But, I mean, insurrections, notwithstanding, I mean, probably the whole my favorite part of the Brazil saga has been just Jair Bolsonaro being Florida man now.
Yeah.
Just going to he's really getting the American experience. He's going to a KFC, chowing down on a bucket he got from the Colonel. He is vaguely kind of meandering about a Publix, getting a Publix sub, which I'm jealous of.
Pub subs, yeah.
Pub subs
They're amazing.
Amazing. So, I mean, kudos to Jair Bolsonaro for understanding where the bangers are at.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, he's just apparently he's sick now though. I don't know what the deal is with that.
I mean, he was a big advocate for ivermectin, so eat some more of those horse tranquilizers there.
No, it's horse dewormer.
That doesn't make it any better.
No,
Yeah.
well, as horse, we could, George and I could tell you, there's a big difference between a horse trank and a horse dewormer.
Yeah, that's one of my tangential. That's one of my one of my big purchases if I ever strike it rich. I'm going to get an Alcamza horse.
Mm.
Alcamza horse. It's a fun historical aside for
Horse-story.
Horse-storical aside.
Historically.
Is that so? You know, everybody's heard of like Arabian horses. They're kind of the most well-known, expensive, like well-regarded horses.
Mm-hmm.
Within Arabian horses, 2% of those are Alcamza horses, which are considered the purest blooded, most valuable horses in the world. And the story behind Alcamza horses is that the Prophet Muhammad had a herd of horses that he was leading through the desert, and they, you know, obviously these horses were thirsty, so they started charging towards a watering hole sort of when they had access to one. But the Prophet Muhammad blew a horn, and 5 of those horses, listening to him, you know, the command of the horn being that, you know, they should come to him instead of going to the water, 5 of that herd of horses came to him instead of going to the water, and those became the 5 foundational sires of the Al-Hamza line. So it's...
Bro, that explains why horses don't stop.
They just keep going.
Who would have thought it was all because of Prophet Muhammad?
Yeah, Islam, horses, self-care. We had a great this is a good episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We're covering a lot of bases.
Yeah, no, so...
I will say something we didn't talk about in the podcast, but I want to put out to the listeners out there, and, you know, again, we are humanitarian people. We advocate for things like Islamophobia in the United States is very real. It's very prevalent. I think that it's an important thing to fight against, and I think it's important to take the time and kind of, you know, engage with people who practice, and not only that, but to, you know, we in the Western world are so focused on things in the Western world as being, you know, what is right and what is true, and there's such like a rich history and culture, not only of, you know, religious teachings, but, you know, poems by like Rumi and Khalil al-Gibran and people like that. So if you're coming out of this podcast and you're thinking like, oh, what should I, what transcendental media should I, you know, engage with now that I've finished this week's episode of the Transcendental Media that is the Southern Fried Humanitarian Podcast? Why don't you give some Middle Eastern literature a shot?
All right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that delightful anecdote to the show, and for being part of our season opening episode as well.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
It's been an honor. I'm happy.
George, thanks again. And yeah, that's all we got. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your favorite shows.
Y'all be good, you hear?
Y'all be good.